It's not a YouTube filming day unless I have to reshoot a whole video. Hey friends, it's your good friend Tim Campbell-Smith, and today I am answering your searched for questions about social work. I use my digital marketing background to scour the internet and find out what are the most commonly asked questions about social work, and I'm going to share the answers here with you. Now please note, technically I have geared these answers to legally and logistically comply with Ontario laws because social work is a heavily regulated profession. I will be and would be regulated by the Ontario College of Social Workers and also the Canadian Association. So my answers are very geared to that, so please always cross-reference and double-check the answers I give with your regulatory body. But otherwise, and you'll see a lot of the questions aren't totally bound by regulatory bodies. Before we go too far, make sure you like and subscribe for all things higher ed, business, mental health, photography, and I don't know, life. Okay, so I'm gonna go to my notes here and my questions. Let's dive into it. Question number 1, what does a social worker even do? Everything. Jokes aside, social workers do a lot. The regulatory colleges and regulatory bodies in Ontario and Canada basically say that social workers work to alleviate human suffering against injustices, working with individuals, groups, and communities. I would say what we do kind of breaks down into like 3 types of jobs or 3 categories of jobs that we commonly see in social work. And no, for any of you who know social work, I'm not going to talk about micro, meso, macro. Actually, we tend to see the work we do focused around counseling, tactical support, or community organizing and like policy work. So counseling is often going to be, will either be direct and private, it may be in a community agency, or you may be using counseling skills in other places like a school. Tactical support would look like targeted programs for specific populations, so think like food banks, housing support, services for immigrants and newcomers. And then finally, there's community organizing, community work, and policy work. So policy would involve like writing, especially like government policies, critiquing policies, consulting for governments or NGOs, community organizing, literally working with communities. Next question, are social work internships, practicums, or placements paid? No, it's a big problem. There are Australian nursing students who are leading the charge on this and getting paid placements, but at the time of recording, by and large, no. Social work students actually pay to do our placements. It's a problem. Are social work jobs in demand? Depends where you are and what time it is, but at the time of recording, I would say yes, by and large, social work jobs are highly in demand. Apparently, and I read this, but I've also seen this and experienced this in school, child welfare jobs for social workers are constantly in demand because they have high burnout rates, high turnover rates. It's really hard work to do. There's also greater demand if you're rural, if you have a specialized experience or you work with specialized populations. Next, can social work help with housing? Yes. Depends where the social worker is, but for the most part, almost anywhere you interact with a social worker, yes, they can help with housing. Next, and I had to really do my homework for this one, when and how did social work start? So I had to look this up and apply it to Canada, but basically the story goes that in Canada, our earliest roots in social work come from England, France, and the US. The earliest version of, and what we would understand to be social work, was often working on behalf of a religious organization and working with people who were poor or homeless. At the time, the primary focus was psychosocial and actually more spiritual because there was a lot of religious leaders or religious folks who were engaging in what we understand to be social work. And it focused a lot on comforting people and providing them supports or access to supports that they needed. And I'm going to check my notes to get this right. The Canadian Association of Social Workers was originally formed in 1926 and had a primary mandate for children and family welfare or municipal governments and for settlement workers. From there, the profession grew in response to what was happening in select areas and then around the country, especially through the Great Depression, through especially like World War II, and in response to what people needed. And that's what gave us the many different branches and avenues and considerations for social work. And that's a very simplified version of how we got here today. Next question, what social work jobs pay the most? Easy. Hospitals, schools, and private practice therapy. Next, where do social workers work? Everywhere. We walk among you. No, but like actually it's shocking. I tried to come up with a list of all the different places where social workers work, and I had to stop my notes at taking half the page. So social workers work in every level of school, from primary to college to university, hospitals, government offices, including MPs or MPPs in some cases, food banks, housing centers, churches, hospice, child welfare agencies, family support agencies, rehabilitation and addiction centers, clinics and doctors' offices, corrections, veteran support, public health, street teams for homelessness, drug or disease prevention, indigenous community services and band councils, immigration and newcomer services, shelters, police stations, crisis intervention centers, and phone lines, employee assistance programs, and for companies, including but not limited to within HR, family courts, overseas with NGOs, human rights organizations, academic and research groups, policy development groups, and more specifically, the government, foster care, and adoption. Whew! There's a lot more, but we work everywhere. Next question, why is social work important? I think social work is important because we meet at the gaps of other professions, and where other professions don't jive or have overlap or a lot of overlap. We fill in the cracks in society so that nobody gets left behind, providing them or connecting them to the supports and the services they need, but also like the psychosocial support that they would benefit from. I think the other core reason why social work is so important is because most other helping professions are specialist in nature and scope. Nurses do a very specific job. Occupational therapists do a very specific job. Doctors do a very specific job. PSWs, personal support workers, do a very specific job. So they're very specific and niche. Social workers are generalists. We work across many different intersections and possibilities. Next, how do I become a social worker? I would argue that you should start by volunteering. By volunteering and getting experience providing human services to people. A lot of folks go into social work because they have a unique experience, but it's not just enough to have that experience. You have to have the capacity to deliver human services to people. So this is why I say it's actually really helpful and really important, I think, to start by volunteering. I personally, some of my earliest volunteering experiences, one of them was volunteering with a health organization, collaborating with other patients, doctors, and medical staff to improve the delivery of medical services to patients. Because I thought I was interested in healthcare, and doing that really sparked that. And I realized like, oh, I am really interested in the medical system, medical care, and in a social work context, in medical social work. But I've also done, and it doesn't have to always be related or directly related, so this is another example. I've done business mentoring, coaching for marginalized populations, and especially people experiencing poverty or near poverty, because that's part of my story. Entrepreneurship helped me out of poverty, and I see how it can be done. Now, it's still laced with a lot of privilege. I would just like to use some of my privilege and share it with others so that if they choose to use entrepreneurship to lift themselves out of poverty, I want to make sure that they can. So it's not directly like human services related, but dang near close. And then you go to school for it. So to actually work in social work, to be a registered social service worker or social worker, you do have to go to school for it. The next question we're going to address is about schooling, but to give you like the quick and dirty on it, you can do social service worker, which is typically a 2-year college diploma. This is for most entry-level jobs. You can do a bachelor's degree, which is typically 4 years, though I've recently discovered some post-degree bachelors of social work that are 1 or 2 years, and you can get in if you have another degree. This opens up a lot of doors for jobs, but then you can also go on to the MSW or the Masters of Social Work. It's 1 year if you already have your BSW. It's 2 years if you don't have a bachelor's. Next, I'm rolling a few questions into one. What schooling does it take to become a social worker? What qualifications do you need? How are social workers trained? Social workers are trained in a tiered system, and there's generally 3 tiers. social service workers, social workers with a bachelor's degree, and social workers with a master's degree, or an MSW. A couple notes, and I'm going to try to refrain from any commentary on this. One, in social work, having a master's degree, an MSW, is the gold standard. Many jobs ask for a master's of social work, and some jobs you can only get when you have an MSW, that master's of social work. Like often hospitals will ask for an MSW to do private practice therapy. You have to do it. In Ontario, you are legally able to provide the controlled active psychotherapy with a bachelor's or even an SSW, but it's common that it's a master's. And the master's often leads to the highest paying jobs. And note that you can do some social work-like jobs or jobs that resemble social work, but without a social work degree. You can work at a food bank, you can work providing housing support, or even employment and income support in some areas, in some ways, without a social work degree or social work training. Next, and this is a really hot question I've gotten on TikTok, how do I become a social worker in Canada? First thing you need to know is that you don't become a social worker in like all of Canada. There's no one regulatory body for the whole country. It's actually done province by province. So if you are trained in another country or you've been a social worker in another country, you would actually first figure out what province you want to practice in. Typically, that's the province you're going to live in, and then you're going to look at their transfer process. Every province is generally different. Please note that the requirements, the educational and the practice requirements, will depend on your country of training. Not your country of origin, but where you did your social work training and where you got your social work experience. In my research, because I was trying to go down a rabbit hole to figure this out, it does look like the easiest pathway is if you are American or if you were trained in the US and you want to come practice social work in Canada, because you would look through for the educational equivalent through the Canadian Association of Social Workers, and they have a whole page dedicated to if you were trained in the US, here's your equivalencies and here's how it transfers, and here's your additional requirements. I will include that link down below. I do believe that they have other countries based on where you would have gotten your credential, or the other catch-all approach is that you would submit your educational credentials, which is quite a process, and your experience records. It would be adjudicated by the Canadian Association of Social Workers, who would then advise you next steps, what provinces you may be eligible in, and next steps. And those are the top questions about social work. Comment and let me know if you have any other questions about social work. I love talking about this stuff, and I think the world needs more social workers. So anything that makes it easier and helps that process, I want to be a part of. As always, make sure you like and subscribe for all things higher ed, mental health, photography, business, life. Otherwise, we'll chat soon. Excuse me. Bye for now.